Hello everyone, it's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland reviewer, and I'm here to review The Front Room, and this is a new horror comedy, definitely a horror comedy. No, IMDb just calls it a horror thriller. This was meant to be funny. And this is from directors Max and Sam Eggers, the brothers of Robert Eggers, of Lighthouse, Northman, The Witch fame. And they co-wrote this film with Susan, based off of the short story by Susan Hill. And this film focuses on Belinda, played by Brandy, who her husband's father passes away, and they take in the husband's stepmother, played by Catherine Hunter, Solange. She's like obscenely Southern, like ridiculously Southern. And of course, this isn't going to go well, as Belinda and her husband Norman are trying to have their child. And basically, they have two children now, because this whole film's an interesting parallel between infants and growing older. And one of my biggest takeaways from this movie is I don't want to see this much shit and piss in a movie ever again. There's just so much of it in a 95-minute film. It just kept going back to it and back to it and back to it. I do feel like that's also a bit of a tell to how repetitive this story can be, and I feel like that might be a struggle. The fact that this was a short story, and this definitely feels like they were stretching this out, but it's just the bodily fluids, the farting, it was a lot after a while. And they even have a montage of baby diaper and old lady stuff in the toilet and her covered in excrement, and you're just like, oh my. And after a while it just felt for cheap laughs and for cheap gross out moments, and you're just, it was too much. From a filmmaking standpoint, I feel like this is well shot. I think that Eggers brothers have a good eye for directing. Maybe not as dynamic as their brother Robert, but it's still really effective. One thing that I feel like really stood out about the film is Marcello Zarvas's score, which has that old school kind of Psycho feel, and then a theremin coming in there making this sound like a 50s sci-fi movie. It has that old school kind of horror feel where there's a bit of camp to it, and there's definitely camp here, because just between Brandy's reactions, but mostly Catherine Hunter's, who's just freaking out, over the top ridiculous, to the point where it's you can't help but laugh at it. It's ridiculous. And then the moments where it's just she's crying and her stepson will just hug her and she's like, ah, and just stare at Brandy and just ooh, this is warfare. And their interactions are just so good. And the back and forth. Catherine Hunter's performance is wild. She is committed. This is Nick Cage level, going above and beyond with some of the choices that she made. Her screaming about messing herself, screaming, M-E-S-S, mess! And I'm just oh my god, this woman is unhinged. And I think Brandy gets up to that level at some times, back with her. I do feel like the husband character, played by Andrew Burnham, is so frustrating, though. He is the textbook definition of horror movie husband, who's just but honey, and it's just you're an idiot. It's so obvious, and he's so frustrating. His presence is so frustrating in this movie that it legitimately takes you out of the film a lot. But this film is repetitive. It is overly simplified in terms of its religious commentary its commentary on racism. It just feels so shallow. It doesn't really offer anything interesting or dynamic in how it presents those things. The most interesting ideas is the parallel between infancy and getting older and how we revert back to that. And I feel like this film is able to capture that really well. It's just that it's done over and over and over and over and over again. And like I mentioned before, this film just feels so stretched out. But on some level, the campy ridiculousness of it all makes it still like this is a, I would say, easy watch from like a tonal perspective and a pacing perspective, not from what you have to see and how much of it you have to see in the film. So I feel like this is a very mixed bag of a film, and if you're in for a good campy horror movie that feels a little old school, I think this will scratch the itch. But those are my thoughts on The Front Room. Let me know what you think. Let's talk some movies. But thank you as always for tuning in and supporting your Wasteland reviewer.